Today, non-designers and designers collectively consume architecture in a predominantly visual way. We consume architecture on the screen, and in turn desensitizing our other aspects of our senses. Our experience of architecture has been condensed to what is called the money shot.
Johanny Plasma once said that a meaningful architectural experience is not simply a series of retinal images. The elements of architecture are not visual units or results. They are encounters, confrontations that interact with memory.
Abstraction was a form of art that was realized in the 1800s, saying that we should make art for art's sake. The very first evidence of abstraction started with Hilma af Klint as a means to create a diagrammatic representation to explaining theosophical ideas. In a way, throughout history, abstraction was never for the art itself but its communicative properties, as Piet Mondrian explained that abstraction is participatory, and according to Dave Hickey, that art is for the people, thus must be accepting and forgiving. That is art doing something to us, accepting and forgiving us.
However, although painting is a two-dimensional art form, we can learn a lot about how it communicates with its viewers in a three-dimensional perspective. It may be possible to find an analogous aesthetic experience to architectural gestures based from art interpretations adapted to neuroscience, sequentially creating a democratic and intuitive architectural promenade for a variety of users. The museum theater typology, chosen in the smallest big master plan, stands just across the Pasig River along Carlos Palanca Road. This building serves as an anchoring domicile parallel to the Manila City Hall that connects the two sections of the city, also extending the narrative of the planned pedestrian bridge.
The building in relevance to this site proposes to become a person's third place, as it becomes a locus for commute and pedestrian activity, in which, in the midst of it all, becomes not only a passage for people, but also a shelter for an intimate landscape ensemble. The building encircles the garden, and the garden encircles you.
Throughout Carlos Palanca Road, we are immersed in a predominantly Muslim community that is in need of an instrument to express their culture. Along with the intention to introduce the contemporary art scene in the Philippines, the Arts Center becomes a portal through the community, being its primary connection to the other half of the city, therefore introducing a multicultural influence as a continuing narrative to the structure. Being engulfed in a variety of cultures, worldviews, and modern perspectives, the Center of Arts becomes a building that later on could become a cultural identity. The use of post-war abstract art as a means to find architectural relevance started with Anne Besant's interpretation of abstraction, that ideas, emotions, and sound manifest as visual auras. John Dewey then supports this as, the actual work of art is what the product does with the experience, and that art is the most effective mode of communication that exists.
In tackling this experiential impoverishment that technology had condemned society to, we found that abstract art and architecture may find its common ground with the idea of the aesthetic experience, or the careful composition of experience in relevance to the different senses and the perceiver. Although the construction of an experience may find its subjective flaws, using abstraction as a means to democratize experience, as by definition great art is universal, as said by Kant, may create an architecture promenade that's accessible, because the wide appeal it commands comes from a connection with fundamental aspects of human nature and human cognition. In doing so, we might find ways to understand architecture as a communicative tool for navigation, and by doing so, making use of our spatial navigation, which is an essential human skill that is vital for purposeful movement, as it requires a representation of our position and orientation in space, as well as our homing trajectories. In this case, we are making use of the allocentric navigation that utilizes external cues or landmarks in relation to each other to navigate and is independent to self.
In understanding post-war abstract art, it is important to remember that art is a heightened version of our lived experience. Dave Hickey mentioned that it is not about how they should work or must work, just about the way they seem to have worked in my experience, or the ways I have seen them work for others. Accordingly, when finding an analogous aesthetic experience to architectural gestures, we may use the cognitive map hypothesis, in which proposes that the brain builds a unified representation of the spatial environment to support memory and guide future action. These can be instantiated by place, grid, border, and head direction cells in the hippocampal formation and related structures. By doing so, we give the perceiver the control over their sequence over a suggested promenade in order to create a stronger, more memorable connection with the built environment. Approaching the project of utilizing abstract art to produce architecture, we first selected 3 Filipino artists to use as our case study. Upon choosing one painting for each artist, we then decided to design a questionnaire to be able to collect written observations and experiences from our 12 participants while being asked to view for each painting. These questions were solely based on the principles of art to be able to both account for every aspect of the diversity that comes with analyzing abstract art, as well as organizing these information. Once collected, the data was studied through a series of analyzing similarities and differences amongst the responses. This then becomes the themes for our initial coding. Moving on to the academic art criticisms, we separately studied documents that talked about either the art, the artist, or both. Compared to doing the thematic coding similar to the online questionnaire, a descriptive coding was to be conducted instead. By listing down exact quotes from the documents, we were able to then systematically identify similarities from these academic art criticisms to the formulated themes.
Neurological concepts played a key role in understanding the synthesis of ideas from our research, creating a set of principles of design that in the end served as a basis in the resulting design of the building. Within our research through each artist and their respective paintings, Zobel predominantly displayed a quality of organization that cohered to our initial ideas of the space and the needs of the typology. Sequentially, we decided to apply his methods to the exterior building fabric.
Throughout the research survey, we found that the responses were quite similar to one another. They would always talk about the subtlety, its dark spots, and the overlaying grid that would make this painting seemingly straightforward because of Zobel's quality sense of order.
Once we have completed the research of the relevant academic criticism of his Aljucar series, seemingly we found similarities to the more academic when compared to someone seeing it for the first time digitally. In order to create a democratic experience, you must dilute a synthesis of the public and the critic. As mentioned before, there was a huge sense of order in his paintings. In his paintings, we would often see the use of the dynamic grid that is an extension of the rule of thirds. The way we used this was also similar to what the painting can provide. So in turn, we played with the sense of depth and the hierarchy of space by protruding major programs, the proscenium theater and the museum, whilst hiding the supporting programs. The facade coheres to Mark Rothko's work, a major inspiration of Zobel, that required you to give something to art so that it could give something in return. Thus, its programs start to reveal itself to you. Once you enter the space, you would see the presence of a grid, as seen in the painting itself. Zobel explained that the grids are scaffolding that gives painting its backbone and a sense of motion. The horizontal lines suggest that the river flowing is bounded on a linear path, whilst the vertical lines break the flow of the painting's center, or the spontaneity of the river overflow. In our space, we created a scaffolding that responds to the typology as it angles itself parallel to the footbridge, which consequently became the basis of the massing and the movement. When the massing was placed and the programs were realized, in planning our movement, we took the concept of derive as a motive to create serendipitous experiences such as how Zobel described his river.
In the same way, we predominantly created a linear promenade that had its start and end. However, we would encounter different programs that would create unplanned passages to urban landscape. We use these as theoretical Euclidean distances that naturally creates paths we call desired paths, as intuitive circulation spaces that ultimately breaks its initial linear intention. In the middle of it all, the void spaces that we were left with became another motive to create another form of cognitive map. In its most intimate setting, the hortus conclusus, or an enclosed garden, is the most intimate landscape ensemble. The garden requires the protection of the space, thus in turn the garden turns into a place. In a way, its intimacy protects us from the saturated public spaces, thus establishing a sense of a third place. The composition of the urban landscape and its delicate garden becomes the primary cognitive map as it uses allocentric navigation to circulate the ambiguous public area, such as how Zobel used dark spots of his painting to lead you in a variety of moments.
Fernando Zobel in our composition of public space achieves a place of serendipity, whilst at the second viewing may lead you to understand the space the way you understood it initially, achieving a tailored experience. Moving on to Arturo Luz, another renowned Filipino visual artist, has pushed our idea of the black box typology to unique extents. Based from our findings, the responses lean towards a relationship between the sky and the city through the juxtaposition of the canvas, its tonal qualities, density, and its undoubtable similarities. In accentuating the relationship between the city and the sky composition, we related this to the formal collisions of geometry as to create a strong presence between both spaces. Both geometries affect each other's sense of orientation in the space, creating a variety of new ways to present performance that coheres to the identity of the space. In creating a strong bond between the two black boxes, we made sure that the hierarchy was prominent as the city below, albeit the strong presence and the tight, dense line work still remains as a supporting subject to the night sky. Both need each other to achieve its intentions, thus predominantly focusing the typology to the circular black box space. Within playing inside the idea of these prominent geometries, the interior form follows the circle's contours. Luz's persona to achieve a vernacular of authenticity and restraint, enables its viewers to respond through a temporal process in which we slowly realize what the painting tries to resemble through stark renditions of line work. In this program, we tried to relate this concept to the ideas of orientation and place, by disorientating the person by limiting their orientation to the environment such as windows. We could intuitively orient the person with the contour of the circle. However, it's not what it seems. In going through the space, we understand that the stairs lead to two openings with different environments. When choosing the circle, we are expanded to a realization of space, that the curve from the staircase was based from the space, and realizing the strong relationship of the box as an instrument of orientation. Lastly, in accentuating the restrained austerity that is evident in most Luz's paintings, there was an intention to primarily hide the tectonics of the black box, such as its stage lighting. Hence, we realized that a recessed 180-degree mounting system that conforms to the space will reduce the space to primarily the audience and the performer. The ramp and the lighting, on the other hand, was intended to raise and create an idea of total separation or total connection between the performer and the audience. It is intensifying the concepts of the performer to be egocentric, or inversely, collaborate with its audience more intimately.
And finally, our last case study, Jose Joya, an important figure in our history of Filipino art, being one of the pioneers of abstract expressionism in our country. When studying the respondents of the participants, there were commonalities amongst the analysis, highlighting aspects of the painting such as color, tones, layering, and clusters. They were the prominent observations that guided their answers throughout the questionnaire and were used in forming a series of codes. Relating the collected themes from the participants, ideas were able to become more concretized through the use of academic art criticisms. Thoughts on the legibility of the clustering was able to be identified for the intention of having a central core, or eye of the storm. In turn, the textures and layering was explained in the materials Joya would use, as well as its process and application. Joya was known for his unique use of ubok in creating his very tactile work. He made use of this thick paste in order to produce such layers and dimension we see in his paintings. Observing this, our participants did notice its intuitive application and how it allowed them to read the painting itself. These layers of ubok seem to have a clear movement as though it is spewing out lava from a volcano, as described by one academic criticism. This idea was later realized in identifying an anchor in the proposed Joya Theater, allowing the stage to be what Joya likes to call the eye of the storm. The supporting areas within the theater, like the audience seating, then spew away from it. At first glance, the painting may appear chaotic to some degree. Viewers may initially not understand the movement of the impastos. However, along with this later understood intuitive and legible movement, there is also the sense of clustering that lets viewers affiliate them to recognizable forms. It is quite similar to looking at a painting or random floor tile and grouping shapes to create what we identify to be a flower, a dog, or even a person. Clustering is one way people gear towards to trying to understand things. Through the affiliation of groups, when affiliating ourselves with people we know, for example, they provide members with information, assistance, and social support. Stanley Schachtner explored this process by putting individuals in ambiguous, stressful situations and asking them if they wish to wait alone or with others. He found that people affiliate in such situations, they seek the company of others. Although any kind of companionship is appreciated, we prefer those who provide us with the reassurance and support as well as the accurate information. Subsequently, our perception of a purely abstract painting needs the guidance of our own realities, understanding abstract ideas like how our respondents regarded these impastos to be a symphony of rocks. It is when the painting starts to create an exclusive relationship to the perceiver. Applied in the seating arrangement of the audience, seats are clustered in zones that in the eye level from entering the theater may seem confusing, though when looking at the ceiling that reflects the seat plan, the association guides the person to their assigned cluster. In the end, the segregation and positioning of the seats created a dynamic floor plan within the confinements of the whole theater. As Joya's work displays the visible process of how the painting was created, the envelope of the theater aims to do the same, by being transparent to the interiors of the theater through its honest form.
In realizing the project concept, although there were some restrictions that we cannot simply design with all the senses from a digital constraint, albeit a theoretical project, interestingly, we found that when we intensified the visual, we subsequently developed the idea of a democratic experience rather than the complete aesthetic experience. Neuroscience enabled us to create ideas that enabled the perceiver to relate their individual personas to the space, in essence being more connected to the space, based from what they connect with rather than what they have to connect with, as a dogmatic idea that we attempted to get rid of.
Producing the project, we were able to come up with a place that not only represents these 3 Filipino artist figures, but became a hub to promote the development of new artists and advance the direction of Filipino contemporary art itself.